Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I don't need to say that I'm shaking, right? I'm very nervous, and for two reasons. Because I'm still very excited of being here. When I was invited by Professor Fidalgos to replace her in this summer university, and when I knew that it was about special education needs for children with disability, and it's not my expertise. Oh my God, what am I going to do there with such good experts in such an area of knowledge? And then Natalia helped me a lot when she told me, where is Natalia? Is she there? That you could bring some experience of your own, of using as social-cultural-historical theory on your own. As Sueli and I, we share the same pattern, the same theoretical framework. I'm not going to talk about psychology or training teachers with psychology for disabilities, but one of the points that we have in common that I read at the website of ISCAR is the connection that applied linguistics, the place that I speak from, have in common, that is the transdisciplinarity. Applied linguistics, mainly Brazilian applied linguistics in general, it's an area where the transdisciplinarity is very important. It's not because we want to be transdisciplinary, but the objects that we deal with are transdisciplinary. So what I'm going to present to you is a research in the area of language teacher education, using as a framework the social-cultural-historical theory. In fact, it's not about a research in psychology or a research in the psychology of education, but as far as I could understand that ISCAR was very interested in establish dialogue with other areas using this theoretical framework. I thought it's a very good thing because you can start establishing interlocution. So, in fact, what I'm going to tell you is no, it's not working. Is it working? Yes. The relevance of social-cultural-historical theory in the language teacher education in research in Brazil. I think that here we have some elements that at the very first point provoke sparkling in your mind to see how can I use, why the applied linguistics in this framework may use, or it's necessary, or it's good to use social, cultural, historical theory. We have here some keywords. If we start reading through the linguistic marks, we're going to see that we have here language, teacher, education, and Brazil, which give us the social, historical, and practices that we have involved in such a thing. This doctoral research was conducted by me, with my supervisor was Professor Maria Helena Vieira Abraão, a very well-known applied linguist in Brazil. So, considering that my research was about the human agency of a teacher in English language in the development of local knowledge, we can consider that we have here two phenomena, interconnection. We have the phenomenon about agency, human agency, and the phenomenon local knowledge development. I'm sure that in 50 minutes that it was allowed me to present it would be impossible to explain all the phenomenon. But very briefly, everybody knows that agency comes from, it's an English word, it's more than a word, it's a concept, which comes from the idea of action. And as far as I know, as far as I could research, this concept has been investigating since the 60s in different areas, which already tell us the transdisciplinarity of the concept itself. It started being studied in the sociology, then it went to psychology, then it went to linguistic and many other different areas discussing this term. And the second is local knowledge development, because it is the hittest thing that in our area, in applied linguistics, that the recent theories is claiming to have as a way of acting and as a way of educating teachers to perform in lessons, in performing classrooms. And the agent here, we have a person, the agent is an English teacher of English, and the context it happens in a language teaching learning process. I think it's quite well to you the dynamic that these elements are giving you already to think why social cultural historical theory. And it happened in a public school, in the basic education, with basic education learners in low-income communities. So if we are saying, you can see that only through these few elements that integrates my research, we are talking about a social practice. And everybody knows that social practice, that education is a social practice. So, when you think about social practice, we may think about human relationships in social situations. And I don't dare to talk about it after so excellent explanations of Professor Nicolai about what social interactions are. We can see that we can already understand that human beings are constituted through mediated activities, and that individual is thought as a social subject. It's not the subject of the idealism, but it's a conception of the individual in your research, or how you feel, or how how a part of a science may conceive the subject, because we may conceive the subject in different ways. And choosing this conception of subject as your partner, as your friend, and as the participant of your research makes a total difference. How are you going to conduct and how are you going to see the whole process of researching? And education is thought as a social praxis. We have already discussed here. I don't dare to go against, or you have a philosopher here, but in my understanding, when I read Marx, I understood that praxis is not only practice. When Marx uses the term praxis, he was thinking of practice in action. That's totally different from a simple practice. Now you can see the dimension when you start defining the concepts that you are going to use in your research. How do you see the subject of your research? How do you conceive the other elements in your research, such as the content, the context where I am, that's education, right? And why it is considered a praxis? Because it happens among individuals, institutes, society at large, inserted, that here we have another element, inserted in economic, ideological, and cultural context. One of these elements is a new universe. It's not a simple universe. It's a huge universe. The practice of a teacher happens in this situation, and not always it was recognized. Okay? And it is understood that the construction of the teacher's knowledge happens through the different contexts that he acts, with different subjects that they get in touch. We have already known for all this week how the interaction with different situations, with different contexts, with a different subject, it has an influence in our construction of our subjective, or in other words, in the development of our higher functional, higher mental functions. And according to Johnson, an applied linguistic, American applied linguist, very dedicated to build up an understanding of the teacher language education through this framework, through the Vygotsky's idea. She said that the teacher's knowledge is still touched, influenced, or in a better word, produced, constructed in a dialectal way when he takes part in programs of professional work in education communities. So what we're talking, we are talking about language teacher education, language teacher formation. In this case, it's just language because it's my area. It could be any kind of teacher, philosophy, biology, mathematics, whatever. We are talking about learning to teach. Then we start coming to a very interesting point to ask the question, why social-cultural historical theory? You were talking about learning to teach. And we know that it is known through researchers that the interactions, the values, the attitudes shape how teachers think their practice. So by now we start moving from the teacher as an individual, in the pure sense of being, and we start moving to an idea that we have other elements when we get into in a classroom. It's not your it's not only your soul that goes there, right? And you know that the learning to teach is dependent in the construction of teachers' knowledge is dependent on the teacher's knowledge about themselves, how I understand myself as a human being, how I understand myself as a professional, about their learners, how I face my learners, what conception do I have about my learners, or in other words, how do I conceive my subject? As a social individual or a biological individual. It's dependent on the teaching content, the curriculum, and context. These discoveries, I would say, made us think that the process of construction of the knowledge of the teacher, is a negotiated and dialogical process. Something that in our area is very new, is very revolutionary, I would say, because for a long time teachers were not thought in this way, right? And that this process of construction of knowledge is situated, which means what? It means that it's not universal. I am a Brazilian teacher, you are Russian teachers, you are German teachers. You are a German teacher in a big rich city, I am a Brazilian teacher in a very poor town. it makes the whole difference. What the kind of practice you are going to develop. And if we're talking about the practice that the teacher is going to develop, before you have to think that we have to talk about how to learn how to teach. And it comes, and it's emergent from social cultural practices and context. After that, after recognizing all these different picture of thinking the teachers and their practices, we start to value, or the teachers should be being valued and considered as creators of legitimate forms of knowledge. Something that I don't know, maybe it doesn't happen in your country, but in my country it happens that there is a division between who produces knowledge, the scholars at the academia, and the teachers who applies this knowledge. So, after the changes in epistemology, after epistemological changes that it moved from behaviorism to situated cognition, and 30 years of cognitive theory researches, these two processes in the level of production of knowledge have reviewed the social practice that is involved in the teaching, in the activities of teaching. And of course, if you are talking about activity of teaching, we have first to think about how to learn. We have a different way of, a very peculiar setting of teaching, we have to prepare our teachers for that kind of situation. With this movement, Johnson called the social turn in language teacher education. It is in this moment that social cultural historical theory comes to our area, because it was recognized all these elements. In this case, it means to say that learning to teach is not an accumulation of information anymore, but it's a negotiated process. So, Vygotsky theory, that we call sometimes Vygotsky theory of mind or theory of consciousness, in fact, in the Western country or world it is called, has the potential to explain why so. Now I'm answering the question. The Vygotsky theory has the potential to explain the roots, the mechanism, nature, and consequences of the development of the teachers in all phases of their career and in all contexts that they live, learn, and work. Can you see the organization of the cultural, the social, the political, the economical, the cultural, everything that's inserted when you simply say, I'm going to be a teacher? It's much more than that. It's not you only go to school and to deliver something. For us, for people from the area of applied linguistics in language teacher education, the social historical theory can explain the cognitive process in operation the teacher's learning. And one thing that helped us to follow this framework is that it recognizes the interconnection between cognitive and social context. Everybody knows that it wasn't the same all the time in our history. We have conceived the individual, have conceived the cognition not in this interconnection, but only as belonging to the self itself. Then, what to choose in this whole tremendous, enormous, difficult, exciting, and challenging theory? What am I going to pick up from these shelves of this theory that help us to use it in the language teacher education or any other teacher education. It is the higher psychological functions concept. Right? It's another thing that I'm not going to dare to explain because I know it already quite well with the Nicolai's and Manoli's explanation for us, but just in a nutshell, just to register, we know that when we got to talk about the higher psychological functions, other elements, other concepts, there's more than elements, but other concepts such as mediation, internalization, signs, they are intrinsic integrant parts of the individual the individual's general development. So you are not just a flower that bloom. Okay, we are not spontaneous. We are constructed throughout our experience through the life. We are constructed through our perishivanya in our lives. Very simple, very simple. I don't think it's necessary to explain, but basically I think that the basic idea of, if I could use two words to explain higher psychological functions, would be that the lower mental functions, that it comes from the biological sources, the biological nature, such as the baby's act of sucking the mother's breast, and the higher mental functions, for example, voluntary memory, that it comes from social nature, appear in the general course of child development, resulting from, that's the most important word in this phrase, a dialectical process. And this word, this simple word here, these two words here, dialectical process, it has to be in our mind all the time that we are using social, cultural, historical theory, because it is the basic idea, it's the way that Vygotsky thought to produce what he had produced. According to Vygotsky and Luria, they say that only the innate resources of human organism are not sufficient to foster the psychological human development in a higher level. And it was revolutionary, but at his time when he said that, to consider the influence of other elements than only the biological. And if you keep on thinking, you see how dangerous it is to consider the development of a human being like that in this conception. Maybe it was for this reason, I don't know, the Russians can tell me, maybe why this reason that Stalin banned Vygotsky from here. Think for the whole context, considering a human being like that. So, having this concept of higher psychological functions, we can understand that the cognition requires social participation, as we saw yesterday with Professor Nicolai. And it is a process accomplished as a social activity. In this sense, we may start in thinking about something. If I have this in mind, if I say that the cognition requires social participation through the social activities, and it is accomplished as social activity, the individual, this is a Brazilian professor and German professors working together, the individual builds himself through his own activities in social, historical interactions mediated by tools and signs. Vygotsky, throughout his process of building up his theory, he found that language was the most common element, mediating element in the interactive situations that he has investigated. So that's why in the Vygotsky theory, language is so important. Not only because language it's the most important cultural product of our society, our human society, because language is present in all the situations that he had investigated. So, sociocultural-historical theory is a way of understanding how people construct their personal cultures. That's another important point here. Personal culture as active constructors. That's another thing very revolutionary. Maybe it is the other consequence of being banned by Stalin here. Not always you want to consider your partner or yourself as an active constructor of your own life. So, if you will recognize that the cognition is an intersection between biological and cultural, the scholars in the area of language teacher education thought that it would be very fruitful for our necessities to think of how to form teachers in a different way. It is understood cognition is an interactive process mediated by culture, language, and social interaction. And we know each place you go, you find a different picture, a different scenario of culture, of language, and social interactions. We have teachers here. We have Brazilian teachers here who is from Minas Gerais, who is from São Paulo, teaching in another country, teaching children from different culture. And the teacher is Brazilian and the children is American or, I don't know, any other, Russian, any other kind of culture. As far as teacher formation is concerned, the cognition is recognized as a dynamic process of reconstruction and transformation of practice. I left the word transformation because I'm always fair to the author's words. But from now on, maybe we have to use reorganization as Nikolai has taught us. This dynamic process are practices that should respond to the individual and local needs. Now you start understanding the localization of local knowledge in my research because it's related to local needs, right? Transformation, and when you think about transformation in practices, we are thinking of transformation that occurs or are developed that's very important, in contexts cultural and historically determined as revolutionary activities. And why should these activities be revolutionary? According to Fernanda Liberali, a Brazilian applied linguistics, it has in a way or another to minimize social inequalities and injustice through collaboration. And we have another very important concept in Vygotsky theory that mainly related to the area of education, that it is the collaboration. Thus, language teacher education in a social, historical, cultural, historical perspective permit us to see teachers as learner of language teaching. It's a different position of seeing the teacher by the teacher educator. As a learner, to teach, you need to learn how to teach and how to teach, to whom to teach, in which context to teach. It's not just an ability. It's a process of formation. It's a process of education. And we could notice the socially mediated nature of language teaching. We could see that the existence of mediating instruments that shape teachers' learning. And we could see that the manner how teachers learn can shape how they think and how they act. And that's a thing that Nikolai may be very angry about it, but it's how it's thought there. We see that social-cultural historical approach, in our case, it is understood as a theoretical lens and not as a methodological model. And I was very happy when I read this yesterday, Professor Rubitsov letters for us, that I could see that his words meet our words. When Professor says that in this summer school, and having Vygotsky's theory as the most important, the base of our studies, as a possibility of having a second social-cultural historical theory to conduct research on various kind of social practice in the framework of the concepts of cultural historical psychology and activity approach. So that's the way that we feel, we understand having this theory in our area. It means that the Vygotsky theory means to us as an open-ended way of seeing single situated problems. That's another very important thing, that having Vygotsky theory in mind, or as our fundamentals of theoretical fundamentals, we understand that we don't have universal students. We don't have universal situations. We don't have universal context. Every time, doesn't matter where, if you are a Brazilian teacher and you're teaching in the north, or if you're teaching in the south, or if you're teaching in São Paulo, or if you're teaching in São José do Rio Preto, everywhere you go, you have a single and situated context. This is something that affirmation through this framework open our eyes to this situation. And according to Cezarin dos Santos, myself, having this theory in a research or in a proposal of teacher education, it permits to avoid the trend of universal recipes, right? That most of the time never cope with the reality in the classroom. That's one of the advantages. Very briefly, it will be quite impossible to explain my research here for you in these few minutes, because one thing that I realize is that when you do a research using the dialects historical method, it's quite impossible to explain it in 2-3 words. Quite impossible, because doing a Marxian theory, the most important thing in a Marxian theory is not the occurrences, but it is the detail. It is a research of paying attention to the detail. Because it's related to the concept of Marx that I'm going to translate it into English as jump. May I say that, teacher? Notice jump. A qualitative jump. Yes? Marx says that when the phenomena are always in development, but the movement of the phenomena or the phenomenon is too slow that you can't notice. You only say that the phenomenon happened because it suffered a qualitative and a qualitative jump. It's when you say, my God, what's going on here? Where did it come from? It was already there. You didn't notice. You only notice when something explodes, blows. Yeah, I see it very perfectly in my master research about the discipline in the classrooms. If you want, it's a pity that it's not in Russian, it's in Portuguese. I have a book about it, but in this book that's about my research, you can see this qualitative jump concerned about discipline in classroom. So very, 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 very short. The general objective of my research was to interpret and discuss the attentive exercise of a teacher of English language in the development of local knowledge. This is development of local knowledge is a political position of Brazilian applied linguistics towards thinking, instead of using imported methods, instead of using ideas from abroad and simply applying at your context, you have to think about having these ideas that are universal, but understanding it in our context. It's not only, I want to speak English like a native speaker. Then the question is, which native speaker? I want to like a British guy. From where? North, South, or Middle England? From Texas or from New York? You see? That's the difference. And the research method is the dialectical and historical materialism by Marx in a qualitative ethnographic-based research. And just for you to understand a little bit, the questions are, how is the teacher's exercise of agency as a constructor of knowledge as regards her locality? What is the relation between the concrete situation? Here comes the social historical theory as a framework, because I consider the whole condition, social, political, economical, educational condition, affecting, taking part, or as Marx says, determined somebody's action. In the teacher's practice, local knowledge, construction, and agency. Oh my God, I have a problem here. So define this. It's quite impossible for you to understand. Later on, if you want to ask me, I'm at your disposal. What I could see that there are various contradictions in the teacher's practicum coming from their education as a teacher, the teaching, the social, political, cultural, economic, and political context that she was involved, and that these situations, these contradictions, shaped her way of knowing, thinking, and mediating her way of acting. Then we are come together. Even though there are not the development of local knowledge as I was expecting, and one thing that I've learned as a researcher is that we never have to expect anything when researching. The data, the context tell us what it is, and if you want to cry what you find, that's good. Go to the psychologist, say, oh my God, I couldn't find what I wanted in my research. Take some pills and come back to our field, and okay, that's the cruel truth. So, even though she hasn't developed the local knowledge as expected, she kept her intentional methodology choices. It was not what I wanted, but it was what she wanted. However, this is an important point. However, it is very important to understand, and what helps us to understand that is the historical dialectics materialism that helped me to see what was going on in a dialectical interpretation. That it suffer, it hurts to develop, but it's very good. After you have developed dialectical interpretation, you never come back again to monolithic interpretation anymore. You will suffer a transformation. You have a reorganization of all your higher psychological functions, and you'll be a different person. I don't know if for better or for worse, because you lose your innocence. After having developed your dialectical thought, you never see the things in the appearance anymore. You do what Marx asks us to see, to move from the appearance to the essence, and it's not sufficient. You have to come back from the essence to the appearance again, and now in this movement from up to down and down to up, you have another way of understanding what's going on around you, what's going on in your class, what's going on in your classroom or as a researcher. So, however, what she did, how she did, and why she did, it was mediated by the conditions of the realities that she has faced. I think you already had some idea what's going on in Brazil, not only in the level of learners, but acting as a teacher. Among them, these elements are the lack of knowing about social educational realities in the classrooms. Teachers are not prepared to face singularities. Teachers are not prepared to understand that the learning, the teaching, the school context are situated. It's different from that beautiful ideas of education that we have at the university. It's particular in the lack of infrastructure at schools, their workplace, and one thing that was not predicted, it is this, the influence of the market structure. In this case, it was the education department of the city, the town that I was researching, in different positions, different things, and the most important, that guided her way of doing what she does, is the students' behavior that she calls as indiscipline. But as I have a different position about indiscipline, I put it in quotations. So, what we can see that the social cultural historical theory and the human agency and local knowledge development research. In the teacher's practice, there was not individual's intentionality, their agency thought as an intentionality, as an individual intentionality. Even though there was intentionality, it's not a priori, but it was a human agency mediated by specific schooling situations in which her learning to teach has developed. When we understand that, you can understand some words such as, oh my God, I train my teacher and they don't change. Oh my God, I bring it to them everything that's the best, the highest knowledge, and they don't change. Maybe you are facing this situation. What you bring to your teacher doesn't fit their realities. So this picture, this scenario reminds us what I told you before. The subject who builds himself as an activity constructor through social practice mediated by language, mediated by culture, mediated by history, and the otherness. And here are my references for any case you need it, some in English, some in Portuguese. We really have good authors in Portuguese, Brazilian authors reading Vygotsky's theory. Very serious one. I don't like all of them, but the ones that I like, you be sure they are very good, because I'm very strict about this. And